Hello, and welcome to Leadership is a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, video discussion 7, James T. Kirk and Jean Luc Picard, Leadership Styles. So, in keeping with this month's theme, which has been sci-fi, we did Starship Troopers, now we're doing this. Fictional characters, obviously, but anybody that's watched Star Trek immediately knows who these people are. And so what I thought would be fun to do is, even though they're fictional and even though it's all sci-fi and not necessarily related to, the corner store, it still would be interesting to go through and analyze Kirk and Picard and what sort of leaders they are, or if they're natural leaders, or, as I like to think, both of them are natural leaders, but one of them has progressed further on their journey of humility, integrity, empathy, and vigilance, and the other has not. So I watched Star Trek. I think it was, if I remember the origins of it, I think it was the last season was the year I was born of the original series. And so then I remember watching it as a young kid on a real tiny black and white TV up in the corner of my grandparents' house, which was kind of funny. And then when the Next Generation came out, I was just in the Army, and I saw the first episode, and there was a Klingon on the bridge, and I lost my mind. I said, I'm never watching this. Dumbest thing ever. Can't believe they're ruining Star Trek. What's a Klingon? At 18, I was acting like an old curmudgeon, which was very funny. And then a couple months later, I started watching it and realized what I was missing, and so then I watched the rest of it. I'd pick these two just because they're sort of the most prominent. Some of the later iterations of Star Trek had captains that I didn't think were as inspirational or were sort of the examples of bad leadership. There's a couple of the subsequent series that came out where the captain says, I'm the captain and you'll do what I say. Well, as soon as you say that, you've lost all credibility. So anyway, kind of lighthearted, kind of fun. I think it'll be neat to do, and we're just going to analyze Kirk using humility, integrity, empathy, vigilance, and the talent. Same thing with Picard. And then a little twist for a little thought experiment at the end. So anyway, hope you enjoy. Alrighty, and so here we are, video discussion 7. And as we talked about before, it's going to be the two captains, the two first captains of the Starship Enterprise. So why are these interesting? Well, if we think about what we started off this entire thing with back in the original hypothesis, it's that there are leader archetypes, and so those are what are discussed, revealed, talked about, written about, and so whether or not they resonate is basically how close to the archetype they are, in my opinion. And so that's why we have certain movies and we have certain books where the archetype of the person in charge resonates and becomes a classic because it's an accurate description of who that person is. But these descriptions go back thousands of years. And so that's why it's interesting to talk about what it could be like in the future, because I don't think that leadership is going to be any different in the future. So, again, my opinion. So, first of all, we'll start off with Kirk. Now, you know why these two are here, but we're going to talk about it more later. Okay, so James T. Kirk. Humility. What do you think? No, not the most humble, right? Usually, anytime he's on the screen, he's trying to charm somebody. He's got the big ego. He's basically always got the same approach, which is, I'm the coolest thing since sliced bread, and you're just going to have to deal with it, which is not a bad thing, but we're talking about whether or not it's tempering the talent. And so several times during the original series, he will go off and make some big decision or do something sort of crazy and then gets humbled every time and doesn't seem to learn from it. Of course, if you're a sci-fi nerd and you've watched all of these things, the time that Kirk gets the most humiliated and gets shown, what the repercussions of his hubris are is in the Wrath of Khan, because he's approaching another starship, and he's got Savick that's sitting there the one that's filling in for Spock, and she's telling him all the rules that he's supposed to follow when the communications don't work, and he says, don't worry about me. And even other members of the crew were kind of looking at her going, you might not want to tell the captain or the admiral what to do because he knows what he's doing, right? And then, of course, everything goes catastrophically wrong because he didn't follow procedure, thinking that he was so cool and so whatever that he could bluff his way through it, basically. So humility, didn't learn so much, right? Integrity. Well, yes, knows his duty and performs it. But I'm not sure that he understands integrity, not just of self, but of the organization and the goals and what's trying to happen within the organization and the ship and the crew and all that sort of stuff. But he doesn't lie, right? He doesn't go around betraying people. He speaks his mind. He does tell the truth. But as far as having integrity with a philosophy, we don't really see a whole lot of evidence of that. Now, talking about the original series, some of the characters are written as strict archetypes. So Kirk is the leader. This person is the this. This person is the... And there's not a lot of flexibility, which we know humanity is more nuanced. But we're comparing the fiction, right? Okay. But the one thing that he does do is there are several times where he says, this is my job and I'm going to do it. This is my duty to make sure that the crew is taken care of, so I'm going to do it. This is my, So he's got integrity as far as doing what he's supposed to do. Absolutely, right? Okay, empathy. Not so much. His first instinct is usually to go firing off on, off into the universe, and sometimes makes goofy decisions because he's not taking time to understand all perspectives on his own. More to follow. Vigilance. Some, but who are the people that absolutely are the vigilance? Who are the people that are keeping an eye on stuff? He is not necessarily that guy in the series, right? He's not necessarily the person that's keeping an eye on himself and the environment and the crew and this and that. He's not that person. Does he have the talent? Definitely, right? Does he have leadership talent? He's consistently trying to take the competent people, the best, making sure that everybody that's doing the right thing, and are not doing the right thing, but finding the best person, getting all that set up and going after the goal. Does that all the time, which is great. Now, why is it that he ends up being a complete leader? Well, because McCoy, of course I picked the picture of him being goofy and grinning. McCoy is the empathy, but he's like the super empathy. He's the super empath. He's super feeling. He's super, and so he's the one that's all the way over here. It's almost like I'm going to get this wrong. It's almost like he's the super ego or the id, one or the other. Whichever one is the more emotional. It might be the id. Oh, no, I think the emotional one's the super ego. Anyway, but he's all emotion. McCoy is all emotion, all over the place, all the time. So he's the one that comes in and serves as empathy for Kirk. And then Spock is integrity and vigilance. And so between the two of them, they fill out these requirements and help keep Kirk on track. So if Kirk was left to his own devices, I don't think that he has these sort of things, but he has two crew members that are his close advisors that provide him that feedback. And so then he ends up making good decisions more often than not, which is what you would expect of a leader. Sometimes you make bad ones. But that's where that comes down, right? So yes, he has empathy because he has McCoy. He has vigilance and integrity because he has Spock. And so those two people end up being the two sides of the coin and he's sort of in the middle. So he usually makes a decision that's somewhat between the two, which is what you would expect. And like we said, it's fiction. And so sometimes they're written to where, there's a couple of episodes where Spock is put in command And he and McCoy railing against each other because Spock is being purely logical all of the time. And McCoy is being purely emotional all of the time. And so he's all emotion, Spock is all logic, and Spock still ends up deciding logic. Whereas with Kirk in the middle, he takes both of them and makes a decision. So, like I said, fun to talk about. But would that have use in an organization? Probably. But then what does it take, right? Because we talk a little about humility. So let's say that you've got somebody that's the CEO, and then they have the super empath working for them, and then the super administrator working for them. Well, you've got to have somebody here that has the humility to listen to both of them and make the best decision possible in a crappy situation or in a good situation. Difficult, right? Because you take somebody that's super empathetic and have promoted them because they're an empath, then they're thinking that all they have to be is super emotional. Same thing for the logic person. So then you need to have somebody who's the leader, who's the one that keeps an eye on stuff, the one that's looking at the environment, looking at the big picture. And I still don't think that Kirk would be that person because he has these two to flesh out the big picture for him. Once again, it's all just what we've seen in the videos. There's a whole bunch of books. I haven't read any of them. And so we're going to leave that alone. I think I read one book. It's called The Prime Directive. Really good. Okay, so let's get to the thought experiment, the Kobayashi Maru. If you don't know what the Kobayashi Maru is, go watch Wrath of Khan. You're welcome. So Kobayashi Maru is a no-win scenario. Basically, there's the Enterprise, or there's a ship. I mean, it's a scenario. So there's a ship. It's on the border of the neutral zone between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. There's a cargo ship called the Kobayashi Maru that is disabled in the neutral zone. And you've got to decide what you're going to do. So if I remember correctly, I haven't watched the movie in a while, the Kobayashi Maru hit a mine, and so they've got a hull breach, and so life support's failing, so everybody's going to die. And so then what do you do? Well, in the movie, Wrath of Khan, Saavik, who's a Vulcan, is in charge, all logic. She says, we're going in to get the people out. And then as they're going in to get people out, in come some Klingon ships, and they start shooting, and things go to catastrophe, but it's all a simulation. Now, a couple things to talk about with the Kobayashi Maru. One, it's designed to be a test of character to find out what you're going to do when there's, it's the no-win scenario. So as a simulation goes, because I was in these in other places in my life, simulations, where the job of the people observing was to make sure that you couldn't get out of that situation with your, intact. So you make a decision, they figure out what the worst outcome of that is and give you that. So then you have to make another decision in a bad situation, and they go and give you the worst version of that, which is insanely frustrating because most of the time life isn't like that. Anyway, so the Kobayashi Maru, you're put in a situation where you have to try to extract yourself, all this sort of thing. Well, how did Kirk get out of it? Well, if you watch the movie, Kirk actually cheated. So there's your integrity answer, right? Well, Kirk didn't want to lose so bad that he had to go change the scenario. Well, that's a problem, right? Because, what have we said several times? As a leader, sometimes you will have the situation where you have the opportunity for 3 decisions. One of them is abject catastrophe. The second decision is 5% less catastrophic. The third decision is still 5% less catastrophic. Well, your job is to pick the 10% less catastrophic. So in the worst situation possible, you made the best possible decision. It might still end up being terrible, but you did the best you could with what you had. That's my take on what the Kobayashi Maru really is. And they exist all the time. And what I thought was interesting was I was doing a little bit of research about it just to make sure that I had spelled it right, for one thing. And they talk about that this was given to people that were on the command track at the Starfleet Academy. I thought, how interesting. Because, what have we said? I don't think that just because you give somebody a degree and they're really smart and they have some cool education that they deserve the right to be in charge of people. They don't. It doesn't, just because you're smart and well educated doesn't mean that you can lead. It just doesn't. We have no evidence to prove that, right? And so this was given on the command track to find out if you had what it took. So it's almost like an audition, right? Anyway, so Kirk, natural leader, sure, didn't have the philosophy to temper it, but ended up making good decisions because he had a good crew around him. Does that make sense? Sure. Well, it makes sense to me. All right, so next we have Jean Luc Picard. So, humility. Yes. You watch several times. He's trusts people to do their job. He doesn't try to take up the room. He doesn't diminish anybody. He only steps in when there's a decision being made that one, he should make, and two, he's got the wherewithal to make. Integrity. Yes. So my favorite example of integrity is the episode First Duty in the Next Generation. So set up a scenario. Again, I feel funny talking about this like everybody's watched Star Trek. If you haven't, give it a try. So basically Wesley Crusher is at Starfleet Academy, and he's on a flight demonstration team where they go around and do all these cool maneuvers with shuttles. Well, there's been this big accident, and one of the members of the team is dead. So what it turns out is they went and turned off their cameras, edited some stuff, did some things. They went and were doing some super dangerous maneuver that had been banned because the last time they did it, somebody had died. And the leader of that little section of that demonstration team went and convinced everybody on the team to lie and to blame the guy that was dead in order to get themselves out of trouble. Well, Picard being there, being a leader, right, having vigilance, we're going to get to that. I mean, this is why I say it's a great example. Says, hey, we need to use everything that the Enterprise has at its disposal with all of my top-notch analysts, everyone that's the best at their thing, to review all of the footage and see if we can figure something out. Well, they come back and say, hey, here's what was going on, and here's the altitude, and here's this, and here's that, and here's... And Picard goes, oh, I know exactly what that is. So then he goes to Wesley and says, hey, I know what happened. Is this what happened? Wesley says, yeah. He says, well, you got to tell the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, I will. And so Wesley's going to lose everything if he tells the truth. But Picard, I don't care. Your first duty is to tell the truth, which is what have we said, right? If you can't be honest, then you shouldn't even be playing in the game. And so they're sitting there at the trial. Wesley's there. Picard's looking at him. They come to the end and they're basically, we're going to suspend some people and we're going to do some things and we're not going to do this. And just at the end, they're about ready to give their judgment. And Picard's still staring at Wesley and he says, here's what happened. This is the deal. Now, what's interesting about this episode is the kid that was in charge of the demonstration team is a lot like Kirk, because he immediately goes, I'm responsible. Yes, I made them do it. Yes. So then he gets kicked out of the academy. Wesley has to redo another year. Everybody's embarrassed, all this sort of stuff. Well, what does that say about integrity? We've talked about it a bazillion times, right? Just tell the truth. Here's what we did. Here's what happened. Here's what we did. Let the chips fall where they may, but it's less disastrous than if you cover it up and then get found out. Because now everybody knows that you covered it up. Now everybody knows that your first instinct when things were terrible was to lie. So now how are they going to trust you when things are normal? Or the next time something terrible happens? Anyway, this is so much fun. I'm having such a blast talking about Star Trek and leadership. All right, empathy. Yes. There's many episodes, many times where Picard sits there and the whole crew is saying, here's what we're going to do. And he says, well, but if I think about what they're going through or what they're doing, here's the right answer. Here's what we should do. Here's the thing. And so he's consistently doing that. But it's all on his own. I mean, Riker's a good first officer. Everybody else is their own character with their own stuff. written differently than the original Star Trek, where it's like archetype, 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 archetype. And there was no difference, right? Vigilance. Yeah, absolutely. He's consistently making sure that he's doing the right thing. You know, there's several episodes where he sits there and I'm going to, you know, if I think about this and if I'm going to be honest about it, here's what we have to do in order to stay consistent. That's vigilance for integrity. You know, have we considered all aspects of this? That's vigilance. Have you been empathetic enough? You know, are we trying to do stuff where we really have no thing? The best part about the second or the Next Generation is that the one time that Picard always seems to lose his cool is anytime Q shows up, which, you know, why wouldn't you? It's like, so a leader loves to confront chaos, right? Here's chaos. I'm willing to go deal with the chaos because I think I can control it. Well, Q is chaos that Picard cannot control. So that's the one thing that infuriates him more than anything, right? Talent. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. If you watch everything, he's always trying to make the best decision. Even though there's bad situations and there's bad stuff going on and there's bad decisions to be made, or, you know, like I said, really bad, a little bit less bad, a little bit less bad, Picard always makes a good decision. Well, not always, but tries his best. Worst decision he made was to listen to Beverly Crusher and not give the Borg a virus, although they got a bunch of great episodes out of it and a movie. But the Borg should let him go. Because in that episode, great thing about it, he had vigilance. He says, here's what's going to happen if we don't, if you watch that one, it's called, I think, is it called Hugh? I can't remember the episode. I apologize. Anyway, it's the one where they capture a live Borg and they have the opportunity to give it a virus that kills all the Borg. And he sees it. Here's all the bad things that are going to happen if we let this thing stay alive. And then my least favorite character on the show, not going to say any names, comes on and convinces him not to do it. And they didn't do it, and then hundreds of thousands of people die. So worst decision Picard ever made. Anyway, so now we do Kobayashi Maru. So there's no evidence in the videos, in the movies, in the movies or in the series, that we know how Picard handled the Kobayashi Maru. So we're going to look at 2 points in time. Kirk, going through it in the academy, cheated. Would Picard have cheated when he was in the academy? Well, we don't know, right? There's the example in that episode First Duty where he's talking to the old gardener that knows what he is, and basically Picard was a little bit of a troublemaker and all that sort of stuff. Fine. But would he have cheated to get out of a situation? I don't think so, only because we have a whole bunch of episodes where he doesn't cheat on anything. And, you know, the fact that he punks out Wesley so much in that one episode. So I don't know that he would have cheated. Now, what else is different? Well, at the time that Kirk went through the academy and that Picard went through the academy, there was different relations with the Klingons. So the answer might have been differently, or might have been different because the conditions were different. But let's just say border, neutral zone, enemy, stranded people. I don't know what would have happened. Knowing Picard, he probably would have done differently than Kirk and notified, you know, started screaming at the Klingons, hey, we've got a stranded ship. We're going in here. Here's what we're doing. Told Starfleet what they were doing and then headed in there. That's as a cadet. But we don't know. Now, let's take the Kobayashi Maru and apply it to when they were both captains and had competent crews around them and whatnot. Well, Kobayashi Maru for Kirk was what happened in Star Trek 2. But let's say it's the same situation. I still think that Kirk would go charging there trying to solve problems, trying to do everything, fight his way out, being all reckless, right? What would Picard do? Well, at this time, Picard would have done the Picard maneuver, warped in there, try to get as many survivors off, and then beat feet out of there. But I still think that he would start screaming, yelling, trying to get communications with somebody saying, we're saving people, you know, letting people know what he's doing while still trying to fight it. Because that's real life. In the scenario, they would have just kept poking him at every way. But I definitely think, I don't think Picard would have cheated at any time. And so just a different thing about their character, which is sort of what we're talking about when we say humility, integrity, empathy, vigilance, right? You can have these characteristics. If you don't have the talent, doesn't make you a leader. You can have the talent. If you don't have these things, you're not a leader, which is why we talk about, or you're not an ideal leader. So Kirk gets away with it because he's got his dream team with him. Picard gets away with it because Picard is himself the leader. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you're a Star Trek person, obviously this will get everybody fired up. But if you're not, then go watch them. It's good stuff. So the original series. One comment on this is the Blu-ray version of the original series I really enjoy, because what they did is all the scenes where there's, spaceships, or where there's, they've always got the Enterprise orbiting something, or there's some ship. Well, they went and redid those so that they look more like space. So it's actually really neat. The visuals are really good. But they didn't mess around with any of the other stuff. And then obviously Next Generation is great. So, and I'm not sponsored by CBS, as you can see, it's on the boxes. So that's it. Anyway, I thought it was kind of fun. But it also, I think it does two things. One, it shows you that, yes, you can still take those principles and apply them to a person to see if they're a leader or not, right? We get to see their actions. We get to see what they do, and then we can reflect on those actions using those characteristics and whether or not it's the talent. So that's sort of what this effort has been. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Thanks.
All right. Next question. Kirk or Picard?
Well, that's tricky. Original series over Next Generation, but Picard over Kirk.
Correct. You've passed the first barrier to roommatehood.